You and I both had the same issue with USC when we did part one, because we both really struggled to figure out where they rank in the Big Ten, where we should place them relative to our tiers. I think we both agreed that they're right below that trio of Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana. We both think this team is going to be really good. We both had the same questions about defense and schedule. Would you agree? Just blanket statement. At this stage in early August, USC fringe playoff team. Yes, no,
yes,
maybe so.
Definitely. I mean, look, if you're talking about USC as a top 15 team, where were they in the initial coaches poll?
I think I don't have it in front of me, maybe like 12 or 13,
right.
somewhere in that neighborhood.
They're right in that range. I think it's totally okay to say USC fringe playoff team in that conversation.
This is a team that went 9-4 a year ago. They lost in the Alamo Bowl, to TCU in overtime.
Number 14, by the way. Yeah.
Number 14. Okay. It was top 10 offense, despite all the comments about defense. Number 36 defense per the SP Plus. Not horrible, not catastrophic by any stretch. A lot of room to grow, which we can get into. I think there is a good chance we see some growth across the board this year for USC. Number 13 in returning production. They project out as a team with a very, very high ceiling, if nothing more. So as we get into this, I don't want to start with the schedule. I don't want to start with defense. I want to start with the offense and Jayden Maiava, Dan. Because I think that's sort of like the center of gravity for this discussion as we talk about USC. This is the thing first and foremost that everyone's going to be talking about. So how do you feel about that side of the ball for USC, where they were a year ago, where you expect them to go in 2026?
I feel really good. I'm not at great. I feel really, really good about where USC is on offense, just because quarterback is, as we've discussed, it's a developmental position. Good quarterbacks add things to their game, correct things that need correcting. And it is irrefutable that Lincoln Riley, irrefutable that he is a good quarterback developer of talent and production, right? I think that's English-ish. So what I worry about with Jayden Maiava is, how much does he correct some of the mistakes? How much does he correct some of the forcing issues, which I think he did a nice job correcting last year, so I assume he's going to force less this season. The problem as I see it is, if USC is going to come near producing where they've produced the last couple of seasons, and obviously he didn't start all year 2 years ago, they're going to rely on true freshmen. And that's where I'm a little bit iffy on USC's offensive ceiling, whether, they have two promising freshman receivers, a very promising freshman tight end after losing their two most productive tight ends from last season. The offensive line is absolutely stable. I think it's pretty good. I don't know if it has across the board star power dependability, but I think when you look at where they are at running back, when you look at where they are at quarterback, and when you look at least what the upside is at receiver, just because of the scheme, just because of Lincoln Riley's history, they're going to have a top 10 to 15 offense this season. My question is it going to be an offense that once again scores 50 or 60 points against a lot of teams, but not the teams?
Right.
Now, you're not going to score 50, 60 points against Oregon and Ohio State, but producing like an obvious playoff team against those types of teams that you can score 31, 35, something like that against a playoff caliber team, Indiana. So that to me is the question with the offense is there those types of are there those types of gravitational receivers like what they had with those two NFL dudes last year, Jacoby Lane and Mekhi Lemon? Right. And so Tanoch Hines, good, definitely good, and popped early in his career at USC. I think the running backs are good, but if we're talking about USC and what their intention is this year, which it's a failed season, I think, if they don't make the playoff, which means they're not. Is that crazy to say?
Yes and no.
Even though we don't expect them as an obvious playoff team, they're not taking a step forward if they don't make the playoff this year.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I would agree with that.
So maybe fail is too strong a word, but disappointing season without the playoff?
I think that's fair. I mean, look, the floor is really high, especially on offense, because Jayden Maiava is back. Last year, it was his first full year at the helm. There was this veteran presence out wide. Now it's Maiava's team. I listened to our friend Ryan Abraham, who does the excellent Peristyle podcast, and they were talking a lot about how Jayden Maiava's grown this summer and like player run practices, and his leadership has taken a step forward.
13 pounds of muscle.
Yeah. Like you need to have off-season stories like that, I think, to feel good about a returning quarterback. And especially now, given the fact that he loses that veteran presence out wide, it's helpful to have this guy as sort of like the trigger man who is in command and knows the offense. He can get a little bit yippy with his mechanics. We saw that under pressure last season, but we did see, to your point, both his decision-making and his touch get a little bit better. So provided they've got options, let's say, out wide, I think they'll be fine. I agree with you. It hurts to lose some of that veteran presence out wide, but they've certainly got options, and wide receiver has never really been that big of an issue for a Lincoln Riley offense.
Yeah.
I don't really have that many questions about this offense. Like, I am most excited to see what develops out wide and if anybody pops out there.
And they have 3 weeks. They have 3 weeks before Oregon to sort of figure out anything along the offensive line if they need to, but they return a ton there. Figure out running back rotations, the workload for King Miller, or Waymon Jordan, or whoever. Figure out, which freshmen are or aren't ready to catch passes against, the run of teams that they do play pretty quickly thereafter. They have a runway.
They absolutely do. And, more to the point, whether it's like Tanook Hines continuing what he did, or like a young guy like Boobie Feaster, Caden Dixon-Wyatt, like somebody's going to have to step up. Somebody will step up. That's just sort of the way that this offense rolls under Lincoln Riley. What I like about USC, bigger picture on offense, is it feels like they can beat you a number of different ways. And to my eye, that makes them super appealing, especially against a schedule like this where they're going to be tested a variety of different ways by a bunch of different types of defenses and teams. So I like the fact that they've got a couple different pitches, and it's not just like Mariano Rivera in the cutter, which was very good, and he's in the Hall of Fame. But I like to have a couple different ways that you can beat a team if it comes down to that. The defense, though, is probably the most interesting part of the team. Yeah?
Agree.
If only because Gary Patterson is now back in the game and running it. I think there's an open question for me on where they're at with the install of the defense, because Gary Patterson likes to do the thing where everybody knows what everyone else is doing, right? It's not just like you go out there and they give you an assignment. He wants everybody to know what's going on at all times across all the defense, which I like, but for sure it takes a little bit longer, especially with college kids, to get them up to speed and knowing which end is up. If you look at the schedule, they've got about 3 weeks at the start of the season, to your point, to get it right before Oregon comes to town and then things heat up. I know that Patterson has been really effusive about the size of the defensive line. Another one of these coach superlatives that I just love. We could probably make an entire episode out of this, but Gary Patterson on record calling it the biggest line he's ever had.
Okay.
I think that's probably the engine for the defense. I think linebacker is a real issue here. I think secondary is still somewhat in flux, if only because there were a handful of guys that were injured and missed time this spring. But defense, it should come as no great surprise. That's the thing with USC that could truly be a limiting factor. They're not going to be a catastrophe. They weren't last year. So whether they stay about where they were a year ago or they take a little bit of a stride forward, obviously that remains to be seen. But as long as the offense can continue producing at a really good clip, a really efficient clip, their ceiling is pretty high and their floor is also pretty high.
Right. Agree. Okay. A couple thoughts on the defense. We don't have a huge sample size of like, okay, this longtime head coach is now coming back to be a defensive coordinator, a position that he hasn't exclusively held in 26 years in Gary Patterson's case, right? It was his defense at TCU, to be clear. That was not his exclusive responsibility at TCU.
Right.
So there's that. There's the sample size is like, okay, what do we think of Bo Pelini at LSU? Maybe we should ignore that if we're USC fans, right? What do we think of like Gene Chizik at North Carolina? I think it improved early, but then we should probably ignore it soon thereafter, right? We've had a couple of these instances. I think Tom Allen probably did a decent job at Penn State. Not perfect, but he did decent, and he's once again a defensive coordinator, but didn't have the longevity as a head coach as Gary Patterson did. And so we have Will Muschamp, who sort of bounced between, but has been a defensive coordinator a lot more recently, or at least a co-DC. Now that he's at Texas, he had that responsibility at Georgia. So that to me is an open question that Gary Patterson has not game planned as a defensive coordinator for the modern college football game ever. Did it as a head coach with hands on the defense at TCU. End of the TCU time, mixed defensively. So that's a question to me. I thought the strength of this USC defense last year was their pass defense, the combination of their pass rush and their secondary talent. Starting over in the back end to a certain degree. There's some health questions, talent questions. I think the pass rush should be good to very good, depending on how this defensive line, especially up the middle, is able to rush the passer. Because there are definite pieces, and there's young pieces coming in that should contribute pretty early if all works out. But this team was run through, different coordinator last year, but they were run through by a worse offensive schedule, seemingly. We don't know exactly what these offenses on this year's schedule are going to look like.
Well, we're going to talk about that in a second.
But when you look at who they actually played last year and the offensive ceilings of those teams and the talent level on offense, the star power on offense, they were run through by not a lot of incredible offenses. And so, yes, they're better. They have fortified things up front. There's reason to believe in USC's defensive roster, probably more so than where they were last season. But how much better did they get at linebacker? There's, portal additions and stuff, like making changes along the defensive staff. You're bringing in Patterson guys. Eric Henderson's out along the defensive line. New guy, new faces there. There are more moving pieces than I think USC fans would have you believe. The combination of transfers and new coaches on this defense.
5 opponents ranked number 21 or better in the preseason SP+. Those being Ohio State, which is 1.
Has a good offense.
Oregon, which is 2.
Good offense.
Indiana, which is 5.
Should have a good offense.
Penn State, which is 17. It won't be as good as those other offenses,
right,
but it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Washington at 21, I think
should have a good offense.
Should be pretty good. Both Oregon and Ohio State come to LA, which that helps. Good. But they're at Penn State. They're at Indiana. Clearly, those will be tough games. Basically, between the end of September and middle of November, there are no breaks on the schedule. The most winnable game in that stretch there, again, between end of September and mid-November, is Wisconsin, and that's a week before the Ohio State game. So there are a bunch of landmines here for USC if you're looking to see, okay, what's their over-under. I have it jotted down at 8.5, which I guess gives them enough wiggle room to lose to the big 3 in Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana, but basically nobody else.
Right.
So I have them down 9-3. I could see them being better. I don't want to say 9-3 is the ceiling for this team because I think this is going to be a really good team. They are somewhat, though, at the mercy of the schedule, and it just keeps coming at them. So there's probably a conversation to be had later in the game about whether a 9-3 USC that perhaps loses some of these better teams on their schedule, the big 3, let's call them in the Big Ten.
Right.
Do they still have a playoff case? Well, we'll talk about that in November.
That would likely mean signature win Washington.
Or Penn State on the road.
Or Penn State on the road, yeah.
But you get my point. It's a really tough schedule. Obviously, Lincoln Riley's been the butt of some jokes regarding schedules as of late. But as it stands right now, just in the Big Ten, this is a really tough schedule. They're going to have their work cut out for them.
Yeah, to go to Penn State when they do, after those 2 West Coast teams come home. You mentioned the bye before Wisconsin, but that's a huge look-ahead spot. Yep. Indiana, I believe, I'm looking at the schedule right now, they both have byes before Indiana USC play each other. So that's nice, but that's later in the season. That's in the cold, flying east, a situation that Lincoln Riley traditionally has not thrived in preparing his team to win in those moments. And then obviously,
where are you at with
UCLA
SC?
at home. 9-3.
9-3.
Now,
we agree.
I'm willing to believe USC wins one of those 3.
I could be sold
I'm willing
on
to
that.
believe that if USC's starting point is a quarterback in his 3rd year of starting games for the team high-level recruiting along the skill positions, I I think King Miller is good. I think he sort of took advantage of a lot of down teams last year to sort of puff and wasn't great against Oregon and Notre Dame. And I think the defense under Gary Patterson will be fine. I don't think they're going to do anything atrociously poor like they did against the run or just in general, in the recent history. I think it'll stabilize, but I'm not certain that there's enough there to dictate against Oregon, Ohio State, Indiana type. So they'll win one of those three and lose something not obvious.
We just spent 20 minutes talking about USC.
Is that true?
20 minutes.
Okay.
They're an interesting team this year. I regret nothing. They're an interesting team this year, and frankly, if they go 10-2 against the schedule, they should be like the number 7 team in the country.
Thanks for watching, and thank you for at least considering subscribing to the channel. It means a ton.